Welcome to the Gray Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. So, this episode's a little late in getting released. Unfortunately, I had plans to release it last week. I got stuck with some technical issues with the software I use for the video component. And by the time I got around to getting those fixed, it was already middle to end of the week. So, this got pushed out about a week, but today we're going to talk about what is kind of an unofficial trilogy of episodes that I'm doing. Last episode was on Jessica Jones and escaping a manipulative relationship. This week's episode, we're going to discuss Bucky Barnes, also known as the Winter Soldier, and we're going to discuss victim blaming, also known as victim shaming. Next week, we're going to do an episode on trauma and through the lens of WandaVision. Now, these three episodes unofficially kind of tie together on an overarching theme of mental issues. I wouldn't call it necessarily mental illness, but issues that we've all probably experienced. So without further ado, we're just going to dive right in here and we're going to discuss victim blaming, again, also known as victim shaming, and we're going to discuss Bucky Barnes. So Bucky Barnes, also known as James Buchanan Barnes Jr., is a character within the Marvel Universe, both the comics as well as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, we're going to talk pretty much exclusively on the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Bucky. Bucky's played by actor Sebastian Stan. He does an absolutely wonderful job of playing him. Now, the character first appears in Captain America, the First Avenger, and Sebastian Stan first appears as Bucky Barnes, which is Steve Rogers' best friend. Now, when we meet Bucky in Captain America, the First Avenger, he is kind of Steve's hero, if you will. He's a larger fellow, he's joining the war effort. And Steve at the time, of course, has yet to become Captain America, and he looks up to Bucky. Now, to give you a little bit of background on, in case you're not familiar with the movies, you're not familiar with Bucky. So he was a sergeant in the 107th Infantry in World War II. During the events of Captain America, the First Avenger, his unit gets captured by Hydra, which is the villain. They're kind of like an offshoot of the Nazis, if you will. And he and some of his other people, they were experimented on, and he was given a variant of the super soldier serum. Now, he gets rescued by Captain America, and there's a little dynamic change in their power, if you will. When Steve was Steve, he looked up to Bucky. Bucky was the one who protected him. Now Steve is Captain America. He's had the super soldier serum, and Bucky's a little off-put. He's stuck in this weird scenario where the roles have kind of reversed. Now, with Captain America, they go on a mission up in the Alps to stop Hydra. During this mission, they are on a train, and Bucky is essentially caught in an ambush along with the Howling Commandos, which is what their little unit is called. And he falls from the train off a bridge to his death. We're just led to believe he dies. I mean, he falls hundreds and hundreds of feet. Now, you find out at the very end of I can't remember if it's at the end of the movie or not, but you find out in the next Captain America movie, which is, in my opinion, arguably the best standalone movie in the Marvel Universe, and that's Captain America and the Winter Soldier. You discover that Bucky didn't die. When he fell off the train due to the super soldier serum, he somehow survived, and he is discovered by the USSR and Hydra. And he's incredibly injured, so they experiment on him. They replace his left arm with a cybernetic, but most importantly, they brainwash him. And it's at this point that he's basically reborn, if you will, into the Winter Soldier, which is this unstoppable, assassinating, killing machine that just does whatever Hydra wants it to do. Now, as the Winter Soldier, he is regularly mind wiped, brainwashed, and he's stored cryogenically in order to extend his longevity. So in the events of Captain America and the Winter Soldier, there comes a point where the Winter Soldier and Captain America meet, and of course the viewer's like, oh, why are they roughly the same age? Well, it's because when Captain America stopped the plane and fell into the ice, he was kind of cryogenically frozen, and Hydra had been cryogenically freezing Bucky Barnes in order to extend his usability. Now, for 50 years, Bucky is taken off the ice, sent out on these assassination missions, but to pretty much just take care of anybody who threatens Hydra. And he is regularly mind wiped. And this fucks with his head hardcore. During one of these missions, you find out in Captain America Civil War, you discover that he actually was sent on a mission to kill Tony Stark's parents. So he's had a rough history. Now, at the end of the Winter Soldier, Bucky goes on the run. He ends up at the Museum for Captain America, and he sees pictures, which are obviously of himself, but he doesn't know who that is. So he goes on the run to try to discover who he is. He knew when he was fighting Steve Rogers that he knew this person. He couldn't remember why he knew them or why this person was important to him, but he knew that this person was important to him. But it's like every time he tried to figure out why, he had, or it would even get a tenuous grasp on his memories, they'd wipe his mind and it would all just turn into scrambled eggs. So during the events of, it would have been not Marvel Civil War. It would have been during the event. I can't remember which one it is. Oh, I'm sorry. But anyway, there's the one movie, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it is, but you see the UN get bombed, and Bucky Barnes is blamed for it. He's blamed as the primary suspect, and in this bombing, it kills the King of Wakanda, which basically makes the Black Panther now set to hunt down and kill Bucky, because Bucky is now a threat. So this would have been the beginning of Civil War. So at the beginning of Civil War, all this takes place. Now, Civil War goes on throughout that whole movie to basically Steve is protecting Bucky, and Steve knows, you don't find this out till later in the movie, but Steve knows that Bucky killed Tony Stark's parents. But he's doing everything in his power to protect Bucky because he doesn't feel that Bucky's at fault. And at the same time, you got the Black Panther out there who's trying to kill him. You've got Tony who wants to bring him in and he thinks he's a threat. Well, at the end of Civil War, it comes out that he killed Tony Stark's parents. And there's a big fight between Iron Man, Captain America, and the Winter Soldier. And they all kind of get fucked up at the end. And it actually shatters Steve Rogers and Tony Stark's relationship because Steve chooses Bucky because Bucky's his best friend and he doesn't feel that Bucky did anything wrong. And, Bucky continues on. You see him in Infinity War and Endgame. He's one of the victims of the snap. And then when he comes back, you get the new Disney Plus series, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I'm not going to go through and spoil that. That's a really good show if you haven't watched it. It really kind of discusses a lot of socio-political things. I think I think they did a good representation. Not that there isn't some severe problems in there and how they treated Bucky, which we're going to get into. So let's go ahead real quick and let's talk about what victim blaming actually is. So victim blaming is when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act really is held entirely or even partially responsible for the harm which befell them. Now, as a whole, Bucky is just riddled with issues of victim blaming. But part of that is because Marvel really doesn't know what to do with Bucky. I mean, he's a problem child for them. In one way, he starts out Captain America, the First Avenger, as a strong male character. So, and that's big. That's one of the big things that Marvel does for superheroes, especially towards men, is they want to make these big, strong, strapping things. But that's not who Bucky is. Even in the beginning, when you see Bucky be big and strong and whatever, after Captain America comes and rescues him, his masculinity is challenged because now all of a sudden he's not enough to rescue himself. And then once he gets captured by Hydra, he has his autonomy stolen from him. And he's essentially rendered helpless against their manipulations. So now you take this character who has the capacity to kick ass, but he has no choice. He's now following the commands of his handlers. Now, there's a lot of parallels between that and last week's episode when we were talking about the villain Kilgrave from the Jessica Jones series. With Kilgrave, anything he tells you to do, you have to do. In a lot of ways, Bucky was in the same situation where anything he was told to do by his handlers, as long as they spoke key phrases, he did. And it really kind of challenges this motif, if you will, that Marvel has with their strong male characters. I mean, his masculinity is at direct odds with his role as a victim. And this is something that not just Disney struggles with, but the directors that they've chosen, the writers that they've chosen, they have a lot of issues with the way with how to handle Bucky. And it sends a lot of mixed signals. And it's kind of in a way, it's damaging. It's damaging to people who have experienced similar things. I mean, in Civil War, okay, so Bucky gets victim shamed in Civil War because when Tony learns that Bucky killed his parents, Tony Stark's obviously an incredibly intelligent guy. I mean, he's like he's a world-class level inventor. He's a very intelligent guy. But instead of realizing that, yes, I mean, his parents died how many years ago? But instead of acknowledging sympathy, because when Tony discovers that his parents were killed by the Winter Soldier, Bucky discovers that that he killed his parents, and he likes Tony Stark. But so Tony's response, I mean, yeah, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, but he doesn't seem to differentiate the difference between Bucky and the Winter Soldier. To him, because they embody the same body, they're the same person, but they're not. And Bucky is straight up blamed. He's, he's hunted. He's hunted for what he did when he had no agency. And to discuss a little bit, when I say agency, I mean, you can almost swap it out for the concept of free will, the ability to make your own decisions. Bucky did not have that. When he was the Winter Soldier, he was controlled both in mind and in body by Hydra. He did not have agency. And if he did not have agency, he should not be responsible for the things that he did. And that's a tough pill to swallow, especially for Tony Stark. And Tony Stark he refuses to swallow it, which is what triggers the events of Civil War, because you've got, Tony who wants to, when he finds this out, he wants to kill Bucky. And of course, Bucky feels terrible. He doesn't want to kill innocent people. He feels absolutely fucking terrible about it. And it's fucked up because we as the viewers, I mean, yeah, we're kind of thrust into that position, but the overall theme of Civil War is that Bucky should, in a way, feel bad for what he did and should have some level, he is in some way responsible. And Steve stands by his side. I mean, Steve goes up against Tony, who is, yeah, he and Tony have had some differences of opinion, but they've also saved the world together. But he puts it all on the line. He becomes a criminal at the end of Civil War. Captain America becomes a criminal. He becomes a criminal to the country he loves and has sworn to protect his friend, because the world says that he did something wrong, when anyone who would take the time to think about it, I mean, Bucky didn't. Yes, Bucky, the human being, held the weapon that killed Tony's family, but he had no agency. Unfortunately, this is far from the last time that Bucky is victim shamed. Probably no more so than in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier series. Now, again, I'm not going to ruin the plot points to that show because it's still relatively new. And if you haven't seen it, you really should watch it. But there's a couple of things in that show that are important to take into consideration. So one of the things that goes on in this is Bucky is given a pardon. You discover that Bucky's given a pardon, but he has certain conditions to this pardon. One of those conditions is he has to go to therapy. Probably not a bad idea. I mean, he was basically a big giant victim for 50 years and did some, whilst trapped in this body did terrible things. So therapy is not a bad idea at all. Now, one of the most fucked up things is his therapist. His therapist is, and it's one of the biggest problems with that show, that therapist did a terrible, and I cannot emphasize this more, a terrible job of showing how therapy is. So this therapist, if you will, she created this list for Bucky to go through to make amends to his victims. And this list is people that he's killed or families that he's harmed when he was the Winter Soldier. So you see multiple scenes throughout this. I mean, there's this kind old man you see him talking to throughout the show, and you find out fairly quickly the reason he's connected with this old man is because when he was the Winter Soldier, he killed this man's son. Now, this man has no idea what happened to his son. None. And one of the things that you as a viewer kind of get heartstruck of is this old man just wants to know. I mean, it's been years. He's pretty sure his kid's dead, but he still holds out hope because he has no idea what happened. He doesn't know He doesn't know who killed his kid. He doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know anything. And here's Bucky, who this guy's on his list. And this therapist is telling him he has to go around and make amends to these people. And it's fucked up on multiple levels. One, the therapist should understand immediately Bucky, the person, does not owe anyone amends for these actions because Bucky, the person, wasn't the one who did it. It was the Winter Soldier. And these are separate entities. The Winter Soldier had no agency. The Winter Soldier was controlled in body and mind by Hydra. Bucky was just along for the ride. He didn't have the ability not to do it. So he is, in a sense, not even a sense, and it's straightforward. Bucky is made to feel responsible for these deaths by the very fucking person who should be explaining to him that it's not his fault, his therapist. So it's a terrible, terrible representation of therapy and a terrible thing to put Bucky through. Another just terrible, terrible situation for him is there's a scene in Madripoor, which is kind of reminds me of like a seedier Hong Kong. And it's Zemo, because he shows up again, Baron Zemo, the Falcon, and Bucky. They all go to Madripoor because they're tracking down people. And Zemo, because he's a criminal, he warns them. He warns them straightforward. And he says, look, we can't go into Madripoor as ourselves. He's like, I can go into Madripoor as myself, but you two cannot. So Falcon pretends to be the Iron Tiger or something like that. And Bucky is told that he is to pretend to be the Winter Soldier again. Now, as a viewer, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Winter Soldier was a badass, whatever. But let's stop for a second and let's think what that would be like from Bucky's point of view. Bucky is living, especially with this shitty fucking therapist, he's living day in and day out with these memories of these terrible things that happened with his body. And now he's being told that he needs to pretend to be this monster that he himself is still traumatized from. And he does it because he's a good team player. He pretends to be the Winter Soldier. But then once this is done, once they've done their interaction and stuff, Zemo, who is not the nicest guy, he taunts Bucky and he says, look at how easily you slipped into that role. He's like, the Winter Soldier still lives in you, Bucky. You slipped right back into that role like a born actor. And he basically just gets on Bucky's shit saying that, they're not two separate people. You really are the Winter Soldier. Look at how easy you slid back into that. And no one stops for a second and thinks to themselves, like, holy fuck, imagine how traumatic that would be for Bucky. You're trying to differentiate yourself in not only the eyes of the world, but in your own eyes from this monster that everyone thinks you are. And now all of a sudden you're told to pretend to be that monster. And then the person who's with you says, oh, look, you did a great job playing that monster because guess what? That monster is really you. They never take a second to really explore how fucked up that is from Bucky's point of view. And then let's talk about just how Disney itself has an issue with Bucky. So the writers of Civil War, the writers who wrote Captain America Civil War, they said that Bucky could not find happiness because he is 100% guilty and he needs to be punished. How fucked up is that for the writers of the movie? So, I mean, it shows from the get-go they never had any intention of actually showing him as a true sympathetic character, which he is. Again, we need to iterate. He had no agency, none whatsoever. He was forced against his will to do these things. He was completely, it was out of his control. He had no way to, in fact, every time he started to exert some control, they microwaved his brain again. So, the very writers had no intentions of making him sympathetic, had no intentions of giving him some sort of, I don't want to call it a pass, but had no intentions of really showing him as a victim. And then the director of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, she went, one step further. She was quoted, and this is Carrie Skoglund, who was the director of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And she was quoted as saying, Bucky will always have to be responsible for his past. His redemption is that he could take responsibility for his actions and allow himself the guilt. He allowed himself to own that and to say, I did that, and admit that he cannot always hide behind his lack of control. That's a fucking disservice. That's not only a disservice to, the character, that's a disservice to everyone who has experienced these types of things. And it angers me. I mean, there are long reaching, long lasting issues with this portrayal of victim blaming. I mean, you take, what should be celebrated as a more rounded, realistic view of a masculine hero character, not Captain America, who's this bastion of honor and truth and such and such. You take someone who's truly flawed. You take someone who is powerful. I mean, arguably, Bucky is almost tit for tat as powerful as Captain America. But now you take it where, he's not this unstoppable killing machine. In fact, quite the opposite. He's a broken, sad man who doesn't know how to connect with people because he had his agency stolen from him. And even worse off, not only did he have his agency stolen from him, he had his agency stolen from him, then he's turned around and told that he's the one at fault. He's not told that he's not acknowledged as a victim. In fact, quite the opposite. He's told that he can't call himself a victim because he did these actions. He was there. He could have stopped it, blah, 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 even knowing that he had no way to do so. So, I mean, there's lots of terms, and then it's a political correct term, and it causes a lot of divisiveness, but there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. And in a lot of ways, Disney is guilty of this. They're guilty of trying to show Bucky as this unthinking, oh, he fucked up and a man takes responsibility for his actions, blah, 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 blah. But that's not the real situation. He's not responsible because Bucky Barnes didn't do it. The Winter Soldier did. And there's a lot. I mean, you got these. I mean, my son, my 9.5, more than a 9.5-year-old son now. He looks up to this stuff. He looks up to the Winter Soldier. He looks up to Marvel heroes. But these are the lessons that they're teaching these kids, and that's not a good lesson. They're teaching that it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's very okay to be vulnerable. I mean, I don't know. I like to think of myself as a bit of a badass. I've been fighting most of my life. I've been training most of my life, but at the same time, like, I'm a very sensitive, emotional person who's incredibly flawed. And I think that that's part of what makes the tapestry of me interesting. Like it saddens me because you have this character who could be celebrated for his, rawness, who can embrace the fact that he was a victim and come to terms with the fact that he was victimized. How are people ever supposed to come forward, especially men? How are men supposed to come forward and feel like it's okay to admit when they've been a victim? I mean, I was sexually molested as a child. I've mentioned it before. It's weird because I think about it, and it's like when I met with my therapist for the first time, we went over everything and I mentioned it, and she of course immediately honed in on it. And it took her a second to realize, like, I don't have any guilt about it. I think I probably did as a kid because it happened several times. There's lots of extraneous circumstances that's fucked up about it. But when I think about it, I'm okay to acknowledge I'm a victim. I don't feel any guilt about what happened because I didn't do it to myself. I didn't create the situation that allowed it to happen multiple times. I was a victim. I was straightforward, was a victim, and I'm okay with that. And I feel like I've reclaimed my power from it, and I've confronted it, and I've acknowledged it. And it's never easy for anyone, especially in our society that really, stresses this masculine. We don't feel, we don't show emotion, we're never victims, blah, 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 blah. It's bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. And it's creating more and more people that are afraid to come forward and admit they've been victimized because they're viewed as less than. That's a big problem with what they're doing with this victim blaming. That's a big problem with what they did with Bucky Barnes. They're showing people that it's not okay to come forward and say, hey, I was victimized. Yes, this bad shit happened, but it was completely out of my control. I had no agency. One of the things that I think about is and again, to tie in to my last episode when I talked about surviving a manipulative relationship, what did I call her? Jane Doe and Jane Doe and the Purple Man, or whatever I called him. Basically, there's a friend of mine who I'm not going to, release who it is, but I talk about this person in that episode. I'm going to reference this person now. So if you need full context, go back and listen to the other episode. But anyway, to discuss this idea of victim shaming. So this person, one of the people that I referenced that this person has in their life is someone I call Mama Kilgrave, which is this individual's mother, who is just this narcissistic, just all around toxic, terrible person. Well, one of the things I think about when we talk about loss of agency is I think about the things that were done to Jane Doe by Mama Kilgrave. Growing up, Jane Doe lost her agency because she was controlled to such a degree by Mama Kilgrave, to the point where she's doing things that later on in life now cause her trauma, because she realizes, well, maybe I did less than good things. Maybe this trauma led me to do bad things later on in life. And it's a weird, because it's like a layer cake. There's so much going on there. And I think to myself, this is so much like with Bucky Barnes, what was going on with Bucky. Things happen later in life because of things that happened earlier in life. So Jane Doe gets fucked up because Mama Kilgrave is a sick, twisted individual who controlled her every thought and action, which triggers a ripple effect down the line. Well, do you blame Jane Doe down the line for the series of events that set the stage? I'm not sure. I think at that point, you're getting to be victim shaming. And the worst part is there's another generation now that Mama Kilgrave is doing this to. And it saddens me, because who knows what's going to happen to this next generation, because this next generation is, again, almost not quite to the degree that Bucky did from Hydra, but this next generation is experiencing a loss of agency. This Mama Kilgrave individual is telling them what to think, telling them what to do, twisting their view on everything, to the point where they may not be having their brain cooked like Bucky Barnes did, but in all intent and purposes, they are. So then it comes to a point where, do you blame these people when they do bad things? Maybe they say something that is hurtful. You have to stop for a second and think, did they say it to be hurtful, or did they say it because they are themselves being manipulated? They themselves are being twisted. So they themselves are being victimized, and now they are saying something. And then the question comes, well, are they to blame for saying these hurtful things, or are they saying these hurtful things because they themselves are the victim? There's a lot of gray area there. There's a lot of discussion there. It's hard to say. Is it a split? Is there some fault that falls to them as a victim? It's hard to say, but these are real things. These are real things that are happening in the real world. And again, you have something like Disney, who has this big megaphone, this ability to reach out to the world and send a message. And it's disheartening, because this message that they could be sending could be building positive male role models, or showing that it's not okay to blame victims when they themselves are being victimized. Instead of doing that, they are instead playing off to I don't even know what you want to call it. They're trying to maintain their own status quo with this toxic understanding of masculinity. And it bothers me. Another example with another person I know, and this is a different person, but so I know someone who was sexually assaulted, and it was a weird situation. But they were, again, for all intents and purposes, they were raped. It was a situation that was come into play where there was initially a consensual sexual encounter that turned violent, and then immediately following a consensual sexual, well, again, even that's just some gray area there, because it's what starts out as a consensually sexual encounter can quickly change when aggression and violence come into play, because then something that starts out consensually can end in an unconsensual manner. And what made this situation worse was, even after this somewhat consensual incident occurred, a very non-consensual incident immediately occurred afterwards. And what's crazy is this individual did what they were supposed to do and went to the police and went through that, which I'll tell you what, I mean, I'm not a female, but my heart goes out to any female who encounters this stuff, because I went with this person through the whole fucking thing, the questioning, the tests, the kits, it's a lot. It's Jesus, it's a lot. And throughout the entire process, like, and this is not a simple process. There was court dates and there's all kinds of shit that went into this thing. And throughout this whole process, this poor girl is getting questioned. And, some of it is okay because, you make an accusation against someone, it's a pretty big deal. So cops have to be certain, which means there's going to come a point where the cops are potentially going to grill you to make sure you're not making something up. But this poor girl got ravaged by the cops, just, oh, it was rough. And then, almost a year later, after everything, after all the tests and the court hearings and the this and that, for them to literally come forward and be like, well, we're not going to pursue this. And they didn't fucking pursue it. And it boils my fucking blood. And what makes it even worse is because of that interaction, because this individual dealt with mostly men. And I'm not trying to like sex shame or anything like that, but this individual who is female dealt with mostly male police officers. At the end of the whole fucking thing, throughout this whole fucking process, this individual is being victim blamed or shamed, but you can call it both. The whole fucking process. Well, you put yourself in this situation. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done this. No means fucking no, people. No means no. And once no enters the conversation, it becomes a very different thing. And when violence enters a situation, it becomes an even darker thing. And all it does is perpetuate a further culture of silence. So now you have these people who are being sexually assaulted, and they're now like, some are afraid to come forward. Some are disgusted. I can tell you definitively, this individual, once all this shit shook out and nothing fucking came of it, this individual straight up told me that's, fuck it. They were better off not even telling anybody. And that is terrible. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's the fucking society we're living in, where we're shaming people who were victimized to the point where they're just like, it's not worth the hassle of telling anyone because no one's going to believe us anyway. And again, this all is perpetuated by the shit that happens in in the movies we discussed, but also with Bucky Barnes. I mean, yes, he's a man, he's not a female, but he was no more, he was violated to the same degree as a sexually assaulted victim. He had his agency completely taken away from him. And this is a problem. Another huge issue with what's going on with Bucky is this negative depiction of therapy. This idea that he goes to therapy and is told that he's at fault and he's wrong and he's this and he's that. And it sucks, because anyone watching that, who's maybe thinking about therapy or thought to themselves, maybe I could benefit some therapy. They watch this fucking hack of a therapist telling Bucky that he's at fault and he owes these people an apology and forcing him to do this and basically vilifying therapy. It sends a wrong fucking message. We need more therapy in this society, not less. We have enough fucking issues with toxic masculinity leading to mass shootings and all kinds of shit because we have guys who are told that they're supposed to be these unthinking, unfeeling these unthinking, unfeeling robots their whole fucking life, which, leads to a lot of problems. So amongst everything else, it blows my mind at how irresponsible, let's just put it that way, irresponsible Disney was with their depiction of therapy. And even not even just directly in context to Bucky, but just in general. It's a completely just terrible fucking depiction of what therapy is. And who knows how many people got turned off by this depiction of it. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about, and this really rings true for one of my listeners. And if this person's listening, we had a conversation about this via Messenger, and it really it struck a chord with me, and it's something I definitely wanted to bring up. Their handling of Bucky really does a disservice to people who suffer from traumatic brain injuries. And there's a lot of them out there. You can get a traumatic brain injury from all kinds of stuff. It's not just football or boxing or, stuff where you're hitting your head a lot. You can get it from accidents. You can get it from car accidents. You can get it from slipping and falling. There's certain, I think it's like you can get syphilis and shit can cause traumatic brain injuries. You can have a lot of stuff that fucks with you. And what really sucks is there's a huge gap in the knowledge in our society of how to deal with someone with a traumatic brain injury. Because if you think about it, how much of their agency has been robbed by this? So you have someone with a traumatic brain injury, maybe they have a hard time focusing, maybe they phase out, maybe they have a hard time remembering. And of course, people who are around them are just like, well, Jesus Christ, why don't you pay attention? You're not paying attention to me. You don't remember me saying this. And all of a sudden, these people who they themselves are victims of these injuries, they don't have any control of how it's affecting their mind. But now they're being victimized. They're being victim shamed because of something that is outside of their control. I have a friend who's a nurse and she works with a lot of dementia patients, and I applaud her all the time because I'm like, I could never do that. And I admit I could never deal with that. But she tells me all these stories of these people with dementia and these degenerative brain illnesses. And I think to myself, like, Jesus Christ, like, what would their world be like? Like, what's it got to be like inside of their own brain? Because she tells me some of them are violent, some of them scratch and say terrible fucking things. Some of them are like fucking gropers. They grab a hold of, areas of the body parts that aren't supposed to be touched. And there comes the question of how much of this are they at fault for? Because, the initial reaction, of course, is, don't fucking touch me. Don't do this. Don't do that. How dare you speak to me this way? All these things that happened with these people who knows what's going on in their own mind. Like, at what point are they responsible for what's happening? And at what point is it not fair to blame them because they are also victims of their condition? Again, Disney, giant fucking megaphone to the world, has a chance to discuss these difficult things through the lens of Bucky Barnes. And instead, they go in the opposite fucking direction and they make him feel bad for what happened to him, like he's somehow at fault for it. Well, for those who are listening out there, you're not at fault for what happened to you. When you get victimized, you are a victim. It's that fucking simple. So that's what I wanted to talk about here with Bucky. I think that it's important because I think in a lot of ways, every single person on earth, we've all been a victim at some point in time, some of us more so than others. Coming up next, which will be, it'll be released next week, if not sooner, because I have some good stuff in the works after I finish this next episode. But next episode is going to be on WandaVision. We're going to talk about traumas. We're going to talk about how our traumas tend to shape our current reality. It's going to play in really well with what we talked about today with victim shaming. It's going to play in really well with exiting a manipulative relationship, which is what we talked about last week. So as always, I do greatly appreciate all of you. If you haven't had a chance, please come over to the Facebook. I've had some people asking me about where we need to go to discuss potential upcoming episodes and discuss the things that are in the episodes. The best form at this point in time really is the Facebook page. I'm going to look into that to see if there's a way I can maybe create like a discussion board within the page. I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about what I'm capable of doing in that, but I will do some research. I'll find out. For the time being, make a post on the page. I'm really good about getting back to people. We can get a conversation going. I've got some really exciting things coming up after the WandaVision episode. I'll give you guys a little bit of a teaser here. I'm going to be doing some posts about it on the page, so make sure to follow it there. But I'm going to do a 10-part series. So for the next 10 weeks after we finish the WandaVision episode, I'm going to do a 10-week series, 10 episodes, 5 episodes on heroes, 5 episodes on villains from various fandoms, and we're going to flip them. So we're going to take 5 heroes, bastions of honor and goodness. So 5 heroic. So some of them aren't technically individuals. We're going to take 5 heroic, either individuals or institutions, if you will. And then we're going to take 5 individuals or institutions that are the epitome of villainy. And we're going to flip them. We're going to look for each villain. We're going to look at like things about them that are noble or lessons that we can learn from them, things that are, quote unquote, good about them. And then from the heroes, we're going to flip those fuckers and we're going to look at the bad, the things people don't like to talk about. Essentially, in a way, we're going to explore the gray about these and we're going to alternate it. So it'll be 1 week a hero, 1 week a villain, 1 a hero, 1 a villain. I've already picked out at this point all of them. I did some research today. picked out who they're going to be. I'll release the names on Facebook in the next week or so. I'll release who's coming up. There's a couple people on these lists that elicit some pretty visceral reactions. I went over the list today with my Starfinder group. We're taking our winter hiatus, and when one of the particular names came up, I got all warm and fuzzy inside because like three of my friends who are really big into this fandom, oh man, it was amazing. They just viscerally started like, oh fuck that person, this that. And I'm like, perfect, I definitely chose a good one. So I'm really excited for that. I'll release more information, like I said, here coming up in the next week or so. So if you can, make sure, if you haven't done it, please go over to the Facebook page. Please give it a like and a follow. If you can, please leave me a review on there. It does help. I don't have any reviews on there. I honestly don't know if people do that anymore, but if you're enjoying the show, I really ask if you could please do that. I'd appreciate it. If you like my episodes, please share them. Please get them out there so more people can hear them. If you haven't followed the YouTube page, please give it a subscribe if you will. I mean, I think I got like 19 subscribers. It's growing. It's slow. I have a couple people who watch and they comment a lot on the episodes. They prefer the video element. I'm going to keep doing them. They take a little longer sometimes to upload, especially like last week episodes, like an hour and 20 minutes. That took like an entire day to upload that. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram. If you're a big fan of Instagram, I'm not super active on that. I'm trying to get better at it. Now that we're going into the winter months and things are slowing down a bit, I'm going to try to get back to trying to do a post a day. Can't promise it, but it's on my list of things to do. If you have any suggestions, things you want to talk about, shoot me a message. I'm hopefully going to, so these next 10 weeks after the WandaVision episode, they're all solo. Well, almost all are solo episodes. I'm bringing a frequent collaborator, JJ, on for one of the heroes, because I'll be honest, I don't know the fandom and I don't know the hero all that well, and he does. So he's going to come on for that. But I do have other guest episodes planned, which I'll be recording behind the scenes, and then those will get released after the 10-part series is over. So as always, I'm your host, Tony B, and you all be safe out there.